of the non-for-profit BME initiative, and you will find the website later, and he is a keynote speaker in so many conferences, and he also led national initiatives also in different countries in technology and the use of technology in the construction sector. Welcome, Bilal, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Dr. Al-Haj. Thank you again, Professor Delamy, for the CIB's invitation. I'm really honored to be in the presence of so many luminous academics, especially two presidents of the CIB, and I haven't had a chance to meet them in person, but I'm really honored to be with you. Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen quickly. Please let me know if all is good.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, this presentation is about something referred to as the light approach. Okay, and this will become a little bit more evident why I've chosen this topic, why we focus on this effort, which is part of the overall BIM Excellence initiative that Dr. Al-Haj, Professor Al-Haj, kindly introduced. And it complements a bit of what we discussed yesterday, about what the initiative is trying to do. And this falls under Project F, which is the sixth project in the initiative, which really looks at integrated information across the whole asset lifecycle. So I'm just going to go quickly. Why we have this light approach? What is it? What is the light framework, and what's the intention behind it? There's so many frameworks out there. So what's so special about this one, if anything is special? Then how we're trying to extend these efforts through the efforts of the community. So first, all of us in these sessions understand the challenges, of course, compounded with the digital transformation, different mandates across countries. I'm not going to even discuss the pandemic, but really, if we just use the language that if you identify the most important challenges in our industry, we'd find there are too many to count here. But the most important one, in my view, is the lack of supply chain integration, which is really delaying us from reaping the benefit of digital transformation through integration of information. So the idea is, if we can't achieve supply chain integration, which other industries are able to do due to the nature of the products they deliver, like whether it's an airplane or a car, the next best thing, let's say, the approach to get this integration is to focus not on supply chain integration, meaning that would be excellent if we ever have it at a macro scale, but to look at integrating information across the asset information lifecycle, meaning if we have integrated information, we will be able to mitigate some of the issues related to lack of supply chain integration. So digital information management is an emerging field, meaning, of course, this has shot into prominence in the past decade, let's say. I mean, of course, it's always been important, but discussions about standardizations and mandate, etc. But from a research perspective, from a conceptual perspective, it's still really taking its first steps. Conceptual frameworks in this space are really not there. There are, of course, lots of standards and guides and protocols, but anything higher level than that is a bit lacking. We all typically adopt from other industries, and this has been, our approach so far. We of course benefited from lean manufacturing. We brought it into to lean construction. We look at agile methodology from the software industry. We try to bring it in, and there's so many influences that lead to the need for an life cycle information framework. Of course, there's not enough time to go through this, but we're all familiar with lean and concurrent engineering and how they've been applied within our industry. They to a degree predate our information transformation challenges, and they are being adapted and adopted and transformed to match our current digital by default ways of working. There's a lot to learn from the software industry, as mentioned. There's so many models to learn from, like the V model. Of course, we look at ISO 19650 and other ISO standards in the information management space, and for to look for guidance, for inspiration, but also to identify whether there are things that can be done a little bit at a higher level, or maybe at, with a not just focusing on compliance, but trying to understand the issue of information exchange at its essence. And this is really an attempt. This is the Light Framework was an attempt to do that. I'm trying to introduce it to you really quickly. So this is Light Framework has been published. The first journal paper covering the Light Framework published in 2020 with my colleague Eric Poirier from Canada. There's more work being done on this, but this is if you want more details about what I'm going to be presenting, please go back to that journal paper. Like any framework, I'm not going to bore you with this. You've seen so many of them, but the idea is this is about building a framework based on conceptual hierarchies. We discussed this briefly yesterday about the importance of having conceptual hierarchies, clear definitions of terms, clear classifications, well-tested taxonomies, models. Then you get to a conceptual framework, but on its own, it's not that useful unless it's based on practical demand. The demand from industry for digital tools, for as much as possible seamless workflows, integrated protocols, etc. So the Light Framework tries to combine this conceptual approach with the practical need. And this is a slide from yesterday. The idea is that you can get to a framework, as a higher, or one of the highest conceptual structures you can build, below theories if we want, by building on top of lots of models and taxonomies and classifications and well-defined terms. And the Light Framework uses this approach to you will see how it's built on top of lots of these taxonomies and terminology. What does it mean when we say light? There's an intention behind using, of course, when you're developing it, you're looking at all different things, but it also has a really, it tries to reference the importance of keeping things light. If you want, like we try to keep things lean. Here we are looking at light to mean we're looking at the life cycle of the information as it transforms, and as actors exchange it, and how it affects assets across all scales. And I'm going to quickly just decipher this. So when we say life cycle, as in light, you could, many researchers, attending today would be more informed about these matters than me. But I would say that we could look at project life cycle, which is a typical approach in our information management, work, and asset life cycle. That's the same. Here, this framework looks at the essence of both, which is the information that drives the exchange of assets, or the identification of assets, or the execution of assets and the measurement of assets. So within the project and across the whole life cycle. So the focus here is on information, and there's so many definitions of information. It's not, the idea is, it's not really worth going through all the different definitions of information, but for the framework, it really means a compilation of three things. So when we're discussing information, we are discussing what can be exchanged, what can be transformed over time. And this can be represented in our current workflows by exchanging 3D models or exchanging documents or exchanging data sets. So when we're discussing the term information in the light approach, we are looking at the combination of models, documents, and data. Why is this important? Why is it important to understand information as a compilation or compoundation of these three? Is because each one of them is different, and together they give us a picture. But if you want to analyze it and you want to measure it, you can look at specific document uses and model uses that we mentioned yesterday. We can look at how documents are viewed through a viewer, and whether you can develop document view definitions and model view definitions, etc., and big, large scale information environments, similar to what we, Mark Enzert yesterday discussed about digital twin environments. So the essence really, the focus is on information. It doesn't matter how it's represented. It doesn't matter how it shows itself to the actor. Does it show itself as ones and zeros? Does it show itself as a 2D paper that it gets digitized, or as a 3D model? Now, the second, or a third term introduced today and builds also on top of some of the discussions yesterday about systems of, system of systems, the idea of assets. What is an asset? And really, if you try to understand how people look at information management in different domains, whether it is, let's say, in a GIS domain, in a geospatial domain, or you're looking at it from a manufacturing domain, you find these separations, which really can be distilled down to a separation by scale. So GIS would look at, from the built facility up, typically up to the, world scale, and building information modeling typically from the built facility down to the component scale, and PLM from the component down to the part. But this is not really as important as what connects them. And what connects them is not just scale; it's the idea of system. Okay, and I will. There's a link for whoever is interested to look at these different systems, whether we are discussing a site system or a built facility system or a building system, how these are really critical in understanding the information flow across the system. So when discussing assets, what are we really discussing? Are we discussing the physical assets? A door handle, a building, a university, or we're discussing the digital asset, okay? And the model representing it, the document representing it, or data set representing it. So really, the assets is this, fleeting representation, fleeting interaction with something which is physical that can become in an instant is a digital and a physical again, and depends on the type of actor. It could be always digital, or or could be always physical. And when we're discussing transformation, what are we transforming here? What is important in our industry when we're managing information? We are trying to transform the digital into physical, the physical into digital, through scanning, etc. We are trying to transform what is intended or targeted into actual, and then look at the actual and say, okay, I want to improve upon it, and that becomes targeted. You are trying to transform what is needed to become available, and then we're looking what's available to identify what is needed. This is what the transformation, and information is a vehicle of discussion. And then we say it's exchange. When we're looking at active network theory here, and the right framework adopts that, saying what are we really looking at when we're discussing information exchange? Is it information exchange between humans? Is it between humans and a machine, or is it between a machine and another machine? And this is very important nowadays in to try to understand that this is no longer, these subdivisions are no longer clear cut. Okay, we are starting to see the augmentation of humans through digital means, of course, and this will continue to blur the line between what is physical and digital, what is human and machine. And the right framework is within, of course, focus on the construction industry is a framework that acknowledges these changes. It builds them in. It's not like it's reacting to them as other methodologies currently being adopted or implemented. It is baked into the approach itself. So there's so much in the framework. It's impossible for me to go through this in even half a day. But please, I encourage you to reflect upon some of these concepts, and you have any suggestions, or if you'd like to be engaged with this, more than happy, of course, to take all collaboration offers on board. One thing I didn't mention in the beginning: why do we need this framework other than the conceptual need? Nowadays, we cannot really do anything without a tool, without the platform. And the idea behind the framework here is, as discussed again, that we have to go from the knowledge foundations to get to the tool. And unless we have something that people can use easily, like you use your phone, people will not be able to benefit, or will not be able to adopt it and adapt it to their own needs. And the intention of the framework is to lead to the development of an integrated digital platform that manages assets across the whole life cycle. And to do this, the framework is really high up, conceptually. It has lots and lots of components. If I look, there's 10 main ones, and this is the idea of compilation, the compilation of terms, the compilation of classifications and taxonomies into models and then into framework. The idea is that everything has a targeted status, and then becomes digital, an actual status. And then we refer to what's separating them as a status boundary. I want a hospital, you build the hospital, it's actual. And then I want to expand that hospital, you have a target, and then you execute that target, becomes actual. So this interplay, you go a little bit more into detail. The idea is you always start with the purpose. Why are you building your hospital, okay? And we call this the purposes state. So the idea is that you need to define this really clearly. And this is really one of the things that the current standards are focusing on, to identify how to really, state your requirements clearly for assets. The framework takes a little bit of a different approach to it. It says, first you identify the purpose, then you define your, what are the deliverables you need, and then you look at the resources and methods. And there's lots of argumentation to support this in the published works. But as you go down into detail, then the framework starts to identify different milestones that every asset and every type of system will have to, or in principle, conceptually go through. You have to start with the intent to deliver something. And then you have to describe what you expect this physical asset to be. This is milestone 2. Once you do that, if you want to, if it is of any significant size, you have to say, okay, I want to deliver this, but I want to deliver it in a digital form first, so I'll be able to study it. And this is where you start defining your targeted digital deliverables, your models that you need to be generated, the documents, the data sets. And then when you've clearly defined this, you identify, based on these targets, what types of resources and methods you need. You search for them, you recruit them, you employ them, you buy them, you implement them, and then you proceed conceptually into delivering these actual digital assets, which will later become actual physical assets. And then the cycle starts again, especially if you started with the intent to reuse. Now, there's so many things here. I know this is not the chance here to explain everything, but I want to just highlight the idea of coupling. We yesterday the discussion or the introduction, one of the keynotes was about digital twins, and digital twins is an important aspect. And this is what we refer to as the asset coupling. This is between milestone 6 and 7, but this is just one type of coupling that we need to understand. And this is, I think, one of the weaknesses of the approaches that focus just on digital twins. We need to look at the coupling between digital and physical assets, but we need to look at the coupling between what is expected and what is targeted. We need to look at the coupling between the needed resources versus what's available. We need to look at the coupling between the intention for new assets versus the intention to reuse assets, and try to match these. And then there's more components about the flow. And the Light framework introduces certain dynamics in understanding information flow that eventually will be transformed into a digital platform. The idea is that when you go from 1 to 2, there is a forward flow, but at the same time, there is a backward or reverse flow. You execute something, but you need to directly measure it if you executed it correctly. As you go from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 and back from 3 to 2, the idea is that you cannot just execute in a digital sense without measuring. You execute, you measure. These two things are coupled. There's also other flows, which, outward and inward, which it's about sharing and capturing. Now it gets a little bit, as we go deeper into the framework after understanding these different states, the idea that when we're trying to deliver assets nowadays, there's the typical route, the route which is, assuming we start digitally, we have the full route, which we call the computer-assisted route, which goes through all milestones. But as the resources get defined and selected, we no longer have to go through the selection of resources. They become built into the process. And this is where we start to reap gains from this approach. This is where we start to automate, we go through a shorter route, where we don't have to define these resources again, because we have the predefined. And if we have artificial intelligence, or if we have things that have been well automated, we can reach autonomy. When we reach autonomy, we really the cycle, the information cycle is much shorter. Just imagine, and this has been been tested multiple times, as many of you would know. Like when you have an autonomous actor, you tell them, like what happened in Amsterdam for one of the software companies, testing this, and then it became a physical asset. The idea is, I want to span this water body with a bridge. I want it to hold this much load. I want it to allow so many people to pass at the same time, etc. You identify this metric. You don't go and identify who's going to be designing it, if they're qualified. You don't go and model this bridge. You don't go generating documents for that bridge. When you reach that level of autonomy, you only need to define your requirements, and this smart agent would be able to autonomously either suggest and eventually build you this asset. And the Light framework acknowledges this, acknowledges that some routes need to be assisted, like typically what we do now. Others will slowly become automated at the granular scales, eventually, in order to get autonomy. And you will notice, and if your research in this space, that there are so few and far between discussions about this transition, and what does it mean when it comes to people, when it comes to requirements, when it comes to standardization, etc. There's no discussion in our current suite of standards about autonomous asset generation. Then this is, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the idea is about information loops, etc. I really invite you to go through it, and how we can go forward and reverse, and how each of these actions can be well defined now, irrespective of the asset scale. And there are examples of how to go from 1 to 2, what is intended, and how these, from going from 1 to 2 and from 2 back to 3, what does it mean, what kind of flows, what kind of measurements, etc. And something specific about the Light approach. And I'm presenting the Light approach not because it is just, the hope is it's just one framework amongst, hundreds that are going to be generated in this space. The idea here is to generate, as mentioned, a digital platform. And in order to achieve efficiency. So it's really built on practical need. The idea here, for example, in this component, the need to account for and encourage even valid information shortcuts, meaning when you are able to do something in a shorter way without adding to your risk profile, you should be doing it, okay? Current approaches to information management have a very strict, rigid way of doing things. It tells you if you want to deliver an asset, these are the steps that you need to follow every time, irrespective of the project type, asset size, etc. It does mention, of course, in the notes that you should take this into consideration, but doesn't really provide you with any allowances to do that. The light framework is built around the idea that we should minimize process waste. You can go through it, of course, what is a valid shortcut, what is the potential risk, and then the idea of combining all this information to reach a unified pool of information. The idea is that rather than having a series of documents, as currently being encouraged and is currently being mandated, sadly, that you need to have a series of documents that you need to go through. You have to have an AIR. You're all familiar with these acronyms, and an EIR and a PIR, I don't know what. These are like separate overlapping documents. But really, there is ways of looking at information management to allow optimization of this information, to deal with it as if it is a singular pool, but with separate, smaller steps. And finally, here, this information about information tiers, about going from, this, what can be shared, what can be common, and then to what can be integrated and optimized. I mean, the idea is we want, as one of the attendees yesterday, if I remember correctly, her name was Zora, was asking about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is at the core of the light approach, but it is in the center of it. You cannot reach that center before you have everything well defined and then managed and then integrated until you get to a point where automation and autonomy is possible through artificial intelligence. A couple of metrics for the framework about integration, how you go from a reference information down to optimized. Another one about autonomy, and we mentioned this, and how we start with something manual, then we go to computer assisted, then automated, automatic, and autonomous. Why is this important? It's just, some people say just the framework, what's the big deal here? Of course, without the framework, without the conceptual basis, without a proper ontology, we cannot build a digital platform. We cannot measure information flow. We cannot improve performance by shortening the path of information by minimizing process weight. So what does this, in summary, framework offer? It's an open knowledge structure. It is released under Creative Commons. It is actor agnostic. It doesn't recognize that this is a human doing it or it's a computer doing it. It is agnostic to the type of actor. It doesn't matter what type of procurement you are using. It is domain agnostic. You can apply it for smaller assets and large assets, meaning at PLM scale, GIS scale. Just already mentioned this. Again, mentioned this. The idea is we need to understand more about information couples rather than just only digital twins. It will allow, we discussed blockchain, and distributed ledgers. But where's the frameworks which integrate with the current way of working and will allow for current protocols to be adopted? We need frameworks that not only looks at blockchain as like separate topic, but to try to mix it with how people work, how things are defined, etc. This is an attempt at allowing tokenization of assets, etc. I'm not going to bore you with this. You will, hopefully you will get a copy and you go through it. But the idea is that there is something that the light approach is trying to convey, is that we really need, and this is really addressed to the students attending and listening to this later on, we need to think a little bit outside the box. I know it's something that everyone would say, but the idea is we should always try to find different ways of improving information flow. We should not restrict ourselves with current frameworks or with current mandates or current standards or current methodologies of construction or project management. We need to try to find new ways and then test these ways and try to optimize them over time. So lots of things here. I'm not going to go through them because I think I've run out of time. What we are, the light approach is trying to do is, one, is to provide a clear definition of what is needed. What is information, and provide ways of representing this information as a combination of models, documents, and data. And you'll find that by using this language, or of model use and information use and a model viewer and a data viewer and model view definition and data view definition, we will be able to define what is needed and to develop the processes and tools needed to execute it. And this comes back from the maturity understanding and how things get mature. Things get mature when you first define things. You cannot improve the performance or improve anything really before defining your problem. And after you define it, give it names, the limitations, you will be able to manage it. And once you are able to manage it, you are able to integrate it. You're not able to integrate systems unless these different systems are well managed. And these well-managed systems cannot be managed unless all the processes are well defined. So without information integration, and this is again just to stress why the light approach, why the light framework, is that because with the absence and really the hopeless situation we find ourselves when it comes to supply chain integration at macro scale. Of course, there are companies and types of assets which enjoy the benefits of integration. We have to focus on information integration. If you're going to do supply chain integration, information integration will give us a lot of the benefits that we lack from not having a well-integrated supply chain within across the construction industry and built environment. Finally, this is a just to stress a point made yesterday about the WMI initiative. This is the light framework is part of Project F. It's called the Integrated Information Project. We have all these colleagues working on it. From Eric, my colleague, who co-author of the journal paper, Professor Regina, from and many of the colleagues from Brazil, Turkey, and Germany. So we call this F1 information framework. Discussed yesterday the model uses template, is project F2, then software classification, etc. Lots of micro projects in order to transform a framework like the light framework into an integrated solution. So what are the next steps? Like any framework that is intended to become a tool, what you presented today, and it's not enough. You cannot transform this into a tool. So you have to go deeper. You have to develop the ontology for a software solution. There's conceptual components which are missing, etc. Identify collaborators, identify test beds, etc. All this is ongoing at the moment, meaning we're still trying to find like a large partner to help us to developing the digital platform. We already have parts of that platform built, like the BIM dictionary is part of that. But currently the focus is like extending the conceptual components. For example, a paper was just released as part of CIB W78, by a student of Eric Samandavari from. We published a paper about what does it mean to do coupling. So what's the difference between digital twins and this coupling that we were mentioning? And there's a paper with a link here you can download later if interested. So I'd like to thank you again for the invitation and opportunity to present to you. I hope you found this useful, and it gives you, especially to students, incentive to think about conceptual building and to think about how to transform your conceptual models into tools for everyone to benefit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bilal, for an amazing keynote. Lots of issues raised here, and I think it triggers thinking as well as discussions. Maybe some of the points could be argued in different ways with different types of opinions and views on them. I open the floor for questions, and anyone who has got a question, please come on. Okay, we have Shuaib. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Suka, thank you very much for the interesting presentation yesterday and today. And I was just thinking, based on what you've presented today and yesterday, and what crosses my mind is, how optimistic are you that the industry is going to adopt, you know, especially this light framework? Because from my research, that's my PhD research, I discovered that, you know, the industry is quite a bit slow and maybe apathetic in, you know, adopting, you know, such framework or a new way of doing things, you know, innovation and all of that. And it was echoed yesterday by Professor Gasson as well. So I would like to know, you know, your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the excellent question. I think persistence is very important. These matters, and to think about these in terms of decades rather than months or years. Meaning the idea that presenting something and just expecting that people will adopt it, see the value in it, is not really practical. That's one way. So thinking long term about these matters, and many of the components you see here have been developed over 10, 12 years. Second thing is, people only will, there is, you know, if you look at technology, you know, adoption, we need to deliver this as a tool that people use intuitively, okay? Once it becomes a platform that people will use, I mean, it's hidden behind the mechanics of the platform, so people to develop their requirements, they will use it, okay? When it's kept at this level and expecting people to use it, it's not, many people wouldn't be able to use it. So we have to make it intuitive, we have to make it a tool. If you remember from yesterday, we have to move from these foundations and blocks and to get to tools, you know, intuitive tools. Once we get to tools, the potential of adoption will be much, much higher, especially if they're really good tools.
Right. Any more questions? I have also a point. You mentioned when you develop this kind of framework and you reach a level of maturity of it for the life cycle of assets, you can put in your requirements and specs for an asset, and then the design would be generated for that asset. But there are elements of subjectivities when different elements, I mean, when we design facilities and assets. So how the system will be able to deal with that? Because when humans, they have that kind of ability, and they can add that part of subjectivity into the design itself. So how can that be captured within the framework?
Look, I think subjectivity applies when we're dealing with complex assets, and assets made of multiple simple assets. If the approach taken of information transformation or exchange is focused on the granular assets, subjectivity is reduced. So typically when you say, I want a house, and I have all these subjective aspects about what I enjoy as a house, the amount of subjectivity, if we just say, if as a quantity that can be, let's say, something we can quantify versus objectivity, is high. But when you say, I want a door, then the subjectivity of that asset is much less, because it needs to have specific dimensions, specific material, must have hinges, etc. If you go smaller, subjectivity is reduced. So the idea of reducing subjectivity is related, is very important with scale. So we have to understand that we need to solve it at smaller scales and compile it up for this to work in order to reduce this subjectivity you're discussing.
Yeah, thank you. We have Ghassan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bilal, for yesterday and today's excellent presentation. Just to build on Shuaib's question, which is very, very important, in fact, and we have been struggling with this technology adoption and the gap between industry and academia. I mean, reality, if I take COVID-19 as an example in universities, in this part of the world, in the Middle East, online teaching was unheard of. I mean, even our regulators will not accept it if we say, well, we're going to teach a subject online. Suddenly, because of the COVID-19, there was a very big sense of urgency. What do? Either you send students home or you teach them online and you give them degrees. This is what happened. So this sense of urgency makes sure that the adoption was much faster, easier. I'm trying to think of a sense of urgency in our industry, because we've been talking about BIM for 40 years and AI for 70 years and etc. And they still have not really penetrated the industry. So I'm trying to think of what could be the sense of urgency which could happen to just make sure that this technology adoption or any innovation adoption is taken seriously, because it's done in pockets. It's not, there is no strategy for adoption, and it depends on the heroes. One company who's really innovative, they do it, the rest don't, etc. Can you think of some sense of urgency, somebody going bankrupt, maybe collapsing, etc., Dr. Bilal?
That'd be nice. Well, the idea, look, if I totally agree with you, Professor Hassan, but that we can manufacture urgency at smaller scales. Okay, so and this is what we call competition. Okay, you know, when an organization succeeds in optimizing their workflows and improving their bottom line, there's pressures, you know, that happen. So how did this company improve? How could they win this, you know, project and we didn't? Okay, it's because of the adopting lean, or because they're doing this in an agile way, because they're doing the light way, you know. So there is ways of manufacturing urgency at smaller scales. For urgency at a larger scale, macro, as you know more than me, this is when the role of the policymakers, they say, okay, there's benefit here, okay, let's make it urgent. And you guys are in a part of the world, in the Middle East, where urgency is created. Like we have to go to 3D printing tomorrow, you know, it's no choice, you know. So there is ways of doing it. It's not perfect, but yes.
Exactly. This is the sense of urgency. You have to do it tomorrow, and this is the best way of doing it. That's why you see what's happening in Bahrain or Dubai and the Gulf states. There have been a lot of improvement so fast as well. I mean, this is reality. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that nice enlightenment, the bouncing of ideas. Shuaib, please come in.
Yes, thank you very much. So, Dr. Suka, what I'm thinking about the role of machine learning, you know, because you mentioned that, you know, artificial intelligence, you know, is at the core of this light approach. What's the role of machine learning, or is this something that, you know, projecting into the future, you think that is going to assist, you know, just like Dr. Taha mentioned earlier, you know, there's subjectivity for the humans, right? But for the system, probably, you know, machine learning can also sort of, you know, make it go towards, you know, that subjectivity when it's being trained.
Yep. Look, again, I'll always refer back to scale, okay? Scale resolves a lot of these issues. Like if we're discussing machine learning to build a city, it's very different to machine learning to build like a truss of a house, okay? Or to optimize the frame of a bicycle. Say, I need it to be that weight, give me the best, you know, option, and learn for all these different neural networks to get me really the best design, you know, the strongest design. There is a role for machine learning at the core of automation and autonomy, but not at large scales immediately. We have to look at, you know, identifying the smaller scales, automating these decisions for smaller assets, and then over time, the scale will increase for automation and autonomy. So we cannot really approach this as one big problem. It's impossible to solve, and impossible for even machine learning to solve because of the subjectivity issue, okay? Because, you know, a computer could generate for you the most efficient car that you would never ride, you know, because it just looks so ugly, you know, it's so safe and so fast and everything, but you don't like it, okay? But if we subdivide the scale down, then the role of automation and autonomy becomes more evident, because we've removed subjectivity, we increase objectivity, we focus more on the product, less on process, etc. So there's a role, but it depends on the scale.
Yeah, thank you very much, for this explanation and clear ideas here. Any more questions? I've got another one. When we look at information, and if we want to make the distinction between data, information, and knowledge, I felt that from your talk, you are also talking about knowledge capturing here, and a lot of research has been going on since the 90s, actually, on knowledge management and organizational learning, and the differences between what we mean by data, information, and knowledge, and how they are related to each other. So if you can also put a bit of light on this
Absolutely.
reference to your framework.
Yeah, this is at the heart of the framework, but it's not shown. Like, it is like the hidden, structure, the vertical structure behind the light framework. If we think of the light framework as just a representation, like this flat image that you've seen, this is just a layer that focuses on information. Okay, so all these circulation, all these moving forward and backwards, it's all focusing on information. Below it is the data layer. It's how the machines are talking to each other. Okay, it is where the likes of Building Smart International were focusing their energy about this data layer, how best to interoperate between different systems. That's below it. Above it is the knowledge layer. It's all about, when we say knowledge, we mean humans. Okay, we mean knowledge management. We mean organizational maturity. We mean about motivation and all these things. This hits on top of it. But it is like that. One is below. It's an infrastructure that deals with data and connects with products and systems. And one is about information, which connects data to knowledge, which where the light framework is focusing. And then once we have this well defined, and as we're defining it, the knowledge blocks, what need to be learned, what need to be executed, how these learnings are interconnected, will be built or is being built. But there are actually different layers, as you correctly mentioned.
Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely great. I deliberately left out the fourth level, which is about wisdom, so that it could get us into a bit of turbulent waters. But we can discuss it in another day.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for leaving it out.
Okay. Thank you very much for enlightening speech and for the audience and the discussions. And if you let me, I will move to our next keynote, if that's okay with everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bilal. Our next keynote, this is going to be about smart built environment is reliant upon design and construction companies being smarter. It's going to be delivered by Professor Roger Flanagan, who I don't need to say any more than these two names, Roger Flanagan. He is based at Reading for quite a long time. He was past president of CIB, and I just want to take this opportunity to say that we have in the audience two past presidents of CIB, and we have the CEO of CIB. We are very honored to have big figures with us, with all respected attendees from around the world. He was an honorary professor at Tsinghua University Beijing. He was also guest professor at Chongqing University, Guanyang Institute of Technology, those in China. Previously also visiting professor in Hong Kong, Australia, Malaysia, USA, Sweden, Norway, Kenya, South Africa, Turkey, and Croatia. It's just you name it. He published more than 15 books in the construction knowledge domain and project management domain. He was the a member of the board of directors of Skanska for quite a long time, 10 years. He was also non-executive member of the board of directors of Halcro, now Jacobs, member of the board of directors, an advisory board member of companies around the world, US, Hong Kong, South Africa, Switzerland, Canada, and UK. Very warm welcome to Roger, please.
Thank you very much. With a build-up like that, wow, thank you. I feel very humble. I pre-recorded, I've used an MP4 in case we had a problem, and Taha, I think you're going to run that. But what I want basically to talk about is profits. Yep, please do run it. Yep.
Yeah, if you want to say a few words before we run the video.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
At the University of Reading. He will be talking to you about profits in the construction sector.
Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about being smarter. About the smart built environment is great. We need to do that. But it's smart companies that build that environment. And what we're seeing is huge change at the moment. And companies are struggling in some senses with profitability. So what I want to look at now is being smarter and being profitable. And we'll look at four things. What are the trends that are driving the companies? I feel very privileged to be talking to you today. CIB audience, always a great audience. And so what's really going on at the moment? We know about COVID. We know lots of trends, the fourth industrial revolution. But how are companies responding? That's what really matters. And we've got a problem. That problem is profitability in the construction sector. And it's not a short-term problem, this is a long-term problem. So I'm going to pose three challenges. How are smart companies going to deliver sustainable profitability in the future? Without that, we can't invest in the future. And I'll leave you with some thoughts, some messages. Nobody's got any magic answers, but we need to have the conversation with practitioners, with the research community, the academic community. Charles Darwin, he said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the most adaptable to change. And that was his theory of evolution. And similarly, Einstein said, I think the video has stopped. Oh, problem.
There is a freeze, Shoaib.
There you go. So what can we learn? Well, we've got to be adaptable to change. We've got to be flexible. We must think differently, how we can work smarter. That's quite important. Okay, so where's the message there? We're running so fast sometimes, we don't know where we're going, and we're just heading in a direction and hoping it all comes off. So let's think about the global construction sector. And this is something I think really we have to think much harder about, because it's easy to say, oh, global construction. But there's four very important parts. We've got the consultants, and they've design, engineering, and so on. We've got the contractors, and they focus on production. And we've got manufacturers and suppliers. They're our supply chain. And we've got the ancillary people, the IT, the insurance, the banking, the finance. And we've got the regulatory people who regulate, provide the governance, the regulations, codes, standards. It's a complex industry. And we've got to start thinking about it in different ways because they have different profit pools that they fish into. Consultants, 6 to 8% margin, net margin. Contractors, 1 to 3. Manufacturers, 10 to 20. Service providers, 20%. Very different profit pools. So let's just think about this. What is it then that these trends? Well, we've got complexity, much more complexity. We've got rapid change. We've got convergence of companies, convergence of the way we do things. And we've got the 4th industrial revolution. And we've got zero carbon, the green economy, the circular economy coming upon us. We've got a much tighter regulatory environments and governance and control coming through. And off-site prefabrication, automation. Lots of things are happening. And Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, the economist, he described creative destruction. He described product and process innovation, saying depressions aren't simply evils which we cannot attempt to suppress, but something which is an adjustment to change. COVID-19 is a trigger point. It's an adjustment for change. The 4th industrial revolution is an adjustment for change. What is this 4th industrial revolution? Well, the first one used water and steam power. The second one used electric power for mass production. The third used electronic and information technology. And the 4th is about fusion of technologies, convergence. It's the blurring of the boundaries between the physical, the digital, the biological, and embracing new ways of working and thinking. It is a revolution. And we tend to forget the regulatory environment. It's becoming tougher, much more enforcement, very stringent, and much higher penalties. And as you'll see, we cannot afford just to say, oh, this is just something, it's an irritant, we have to get on with it. And governance, health, safety, corporate governance, employment, tax, cybersecurity, reporting standards, environmental requirements, they're all coming at us at an incredible rate. And often they don't reduce, they increase all the time. So let's think about complexity for a bit. What is it? Why are we saying this complexity is an issue now? Well, it's interaction between order and disorder, predictability, unpredictability, regularity, and chaos. If those mathematicians who look at chaos theory, the real world, the world is inherently irregular. And construction is a world of complexity, messiness, change, flow. It's not simple. It's not unchanging. But the systems we devise to build with, contracts, bidding systems, they were for a very different world. And this thing called complexity is messing things up. And design complexity, higher client expectations, digital complexity, green, governance structures. And what we like is we like certainty. We like to be able to look at things in a particular way because all our systems were devised for that. Companies now must be much smarter. And what we'll be looking at now is the new ways of sustaining profitability. And if you think about systems thinking, all of us are going to have to spend a lot more time thinking about systems. You know, non-linear dependence creates tipping points, and that's a real problem for us. And that's what it really looks like. We'd like it to look like the one on the right. What it really, construction projects, is the one on the left. Constant change. And we cope because we've got some amazing people who can cope. And if you look at a construction project, I've been doing a lot of work on the systems area. And if you look at systems, the way they interact, the way that you've got unbalanced systems, you've got fragile systems. But again, all our thinking behind construction has been based upon solidity, systems at work. And they do work, but we get through. But sometimes it's very difficult. And change is now constant. So, you know, we're seeing this thing now, complexity, collaborations, convergence. And I want you to think about the new models of competitiveness. It's not just about being cheap and cheerful anymore. And so this predictability is under threat for us. And it's like this boat going through choppy seas. It knows where it wants to get to. It's got a plan. It's got a routing. It knows exactly. But that weather can cause amazing problems for it. But they will adapt. They're very flexible. And similarly with climate change. I'm sure through the conference, a lot of people are talking about COP26 and all the issues of climate change and the influence, how we embrace that circular economy. Easier said than done sometimes, particularly in the developing countries. But it's going to be the public that will demand it. We can no longer just think, oh, we'll carry on as we are, we'll be fine. And how do we change? Because we need polluting materials. And we can't just flick our fingers and say, I'm having none of those. We have to do it in a planned and progressive way. So if you went back and you said, well, we now know it's no longer incremental change, it's continuous change. That's one message. It's the speed that's the problem. And who would have believed 5 years ago, if you think about the top 250 contractors in the world, you know, China now has a very strong situation. And if you look at just one of those companies, China State, you know, it has an annual revenue the size of the whole of the UK construction sector, and similarly, the size of the French construction sector. That is one company. Scale comes into place now. The other thing is, where is the competition coming now in the future? And we're seeing a lot of new kids on the block. Top construction companies now coming in, top consultants. And the old days of the industrial countries having it all to themselves is no longer the case. It's not saying they won't be there. It's saying there's new competition. We're now seeing many more Chinese companies, many more Turkish companies, and we're seeing change. And who would have ever said that, you know, Murray and Roberts sold out their construction business to a black empowered company? They were one of the biggest constructors on that continent. And indeed, all of South Africa's top 5 construction companies have had major problems. And who would have said that somebody could get fined $3.5 billion US for bribery and corruption, which is the position Odebrecht was in with the Lava Jato, the car wash scandal. And similarly, other companies in Brazil, big ones, huge companies, have been fined. You know, OAS, Andrada Guterres, all great construction companies, but they've run into this clash with the whole ethical situation. And nobody would have predicted Arab tech. Perhaps some people, smart people, will say, well, maybe there were problems or whatever, but lots of these companies, great construction companies, have run into problems of profitability, liquidity, and asking yourselves, what is root cause? It's not just bad management, it's lots of factors coming into play. And indeed, in Britain, we had our biggest one, Carillion, 6.3 billion. And Saudi Alger, similarly, debts reported to be 10 billion. Saudi Bin Laden Group, who've actually the government are now taken over some of the equity in the company. This is change, real change. Now, these are not kind of backstreet companies. These are great companies, and they've had to adapt. They've had to change, and there'll be a lot more change to come. And of course, we're now looking at Evergrande Group with some liquidity problems. Will they get through? We don't know. But the thing is, companies and profitability are a challenge, and we have to accept it is a challenge going forward. So let's think of China for a moment. I said China's basically risen to be a very powerful player. And if we think about adapting to change, what is it that China has done? And it isn't just about being cheap. It isn't just about pure politics. It's much, much more than that. And what Chinese companies have become very good at is project creation. Creating and using project finance, using geopolitical influence. But they've also done more than that. They've integrated manufacturing and construction with new PPP models. So we can't just stand back and say, oh, well, they were lucky. They weren't. These are things that have happened. And indeed, One Belt, One Road has been an amazing initiative, one of the biggest the world's seen. And what it's done is create projects. It spans 70 countries. It's about infrastructure, power plants, communication networks, and so on. And new regional institutions are being created on the back of it. The Asia Investment Bank, Infrastructure Investment Bank. And basically, it's about integration, it's about competitiveness, it's about growth. There's many factors. And it's gone very fast. And China, for example. Now, why have I shown you that? Well, to show you that the construction sector around the world can actually, given the right situation, given the right conditions, deliver amazing projects. That one is a COVID-related hospital in China, delivered in 31 days. And if you looked at the sheer numbers of people, the logistics planning is military precision. So as an industry, we should feel very proud of what we do. But people often don't praise us enough. What they look at is when things don't go quite. We now just finish on China and we think about a project in Thailand at the moment. It's a water project, water diversion project. We haven't got time to go in great detail to this, but I want you to look at one thing. The original budget was 2.1 billion over 7 years. Chinese companies offered to carry out the project in 4 years for 1.2 billion. Now, many people will have views on it, but the point is, how can they assemble the finance package? How can they undertake design and construction at competitive prices? What's going to be the big challenges for delivery? Will the loan ever be repaid? Now, there are a lot of cynics, there are a lot of supporters. I've worked a lot with Chinese companies and I have huge respect for them. They have the capacity, they have scale on their side, they have a vision, and they go for that vision. So we mustn't just ignore what's going on in the world. And similarly with Turkey, if you look at Suma, Enka, there's lots of great Turkish companies around now. This is a project in Rwanda where 1,200 local and 500 Turkish workers were employed on the scheme to work in both day and night shifts. And within 6 months, they produced the goods. So given the conditions, given the situation, we can do it. But there are new people using new models of delivery, new ways of working, new ways of thinking that we've got to wake up to. And this is a project in Vietnam where the Japanese have put up the money for the feasibility, a 56 billion plan to build a high-speed rail line between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, and being funded by the Japanese, and obviously the Shinkansen technology is behind it. So what is our message here? Well, our message is we're beginning to link and think in different ways. We're linking the manufacturing side with the delivery side. And we're doing it with power plants, we're doing it with desalination, we're doing it in many things. So let's just think about these 3 challenges then. I want us to think about challenging conventional thinking, challenging the way we do what we do and why we do it. And something which I'm going to come, which is very close to my heart, is bidding, the tender process. For me, it's the most important part of the job, because if the bid is wrong, no matter what you do, you're going to struggle all the way through. And yet, if you look in the plan of work and all these things, tendering is a very short period. And the assumption is, I'll give the contractor some information, they'll give us a price, and let's get on with the job.
Competitors now look and feel so much different.
Just being digital isn't the ultimate destination.
It's starting to change the way entire industries are thinking.
If you focus only on the thing that you know, you will miss the thing that's coming at you from the left-hand side or the right-hand side.
You have to be willing to be disruptive.
You have to make big strategic decisions. Is my strategy ambitious enough? How does that happen today? How do I actually execute?
So we're saying redefining boundaries. Word I would use is convergence. We're seeing a convergence between design and production, much more. We're seeing a convergence of companies. Single point responsibility is coming through. We're seeing the boundaries becoming more blurred between the professions. And it has happened very quickly in the way that those changes are happening. And if we're saying we need to be more innovative, okay, there's technology, there's process, there's business models, and there's positioning, your market, your company. And there's disruptive technology, as Ryanair and Southwest Airlines proved with the airline industry. They disrupted the model. There's incremental, where we do it slowly at a pace that's manageable. And there's basically lateral, an idea taken from another industry and moving in. So we're seeing all those. So we have to think of innovation, not just as one disruptive thing, but as very different processes. And these people thought of innovation. least they tried. They thought the wings needed to flap in order to fly. Good idea, good thinking, but it wasn't quite what was needed. And I think sometimes we're in that position. And returning to this bidding systems, they're completely outdated and not fit for purpose anymore. How we manage supply chains is again a throwback from the past. We can learn a lot from other industry sectors. How can we balance cost and affordability with this green revolution? And most importantly, I'd like you to think about construction prices. Do they ever come down? And the answer is not often enough, because we need to think about productivity improvement. And if you turn to that gap when you bid a project, you're reliant upon the information you're given. You're reliant upon assumptions you make. You're reliant upon locational information. And there's lots of clouds of uncertainty. And I always liken bidding to clouds of uncertainty. Because we're in an industry where there are low margins, there's high client expectations, and there's a shortage of skills. And this question of the conflict between uncertainty and illusions of certainty is a real issue. We need a new bidding model, a new way that we can actually arrive at a price that a client and the delivery team can feel very comfortable about. Digital will help, most definitely. Artificial intelligence, machine learning will help. And we have to find a different way from that point of view, because it's a complex process. There's a lot of bias in the system as well. And there's a thing called the winner's curse, of course. And too many projects suffer from the winner's curse. Our problem is we celebrate winning a job. We do not celebrate making a profit on the job. We almost feel embarrassed. And that's actually not the right approach. Other industries don't take that view. And we ask ourselves, well, you know, is this just a random thing or what? But when you look at a lot of the accountants, when they look at companies that have gone into liquidation, they often say tendering low margins, optimistic assumptions, inadequate provisions for risk. So let's really think about this. Put your minds to it. All of us have got to stop pretending that we've got enough information. We've got to treat the bid phase as one of the most important phases on the whole project, not just a means of obtaining the price. The assumption is bidding is free. It isn't. It costs a lot of money. The assumption is that, oh, let them take and price the risk. It's not that easy sometimes. And that's why often we run into trouble. Now, the reason for showing you that is to say we are getting there. Many companies are getting much, much better, much smarter, and we can learn from other industries about what they do. And it's about the value of that data transformation that we've got. That's how we can transform what we're doing. And the data is about basically how can we transform it? Well, we've got the people, the process, the players, the product, the procedures. And then digital basically is about change, the shift. And people get mixed up with words. We've got digitalization, digitization, and digital transformation. And basically, it's the impact that we're worried about. And that's what we've got to look at. So data, smart companies are recognizing the value of data, how we manage that data, how we manipulate it, how we use it is important. Because data is not information. You convert it into information. You've got knowledge, you've got wisdom. And what we've got to understand is how we move from one phase to the next. And let's step back just for a moment and think about this very complex supply chain, you know, where you've got bidding, time planning, resource management, quality control, health and safety, and so on. Very complex process. And we're still trying to manage with the outdated ways of managing. And what we've got to try and do is bring this together. And this shows a little bit way that it can be done.
So the Melbourne Metro project is a highly complex major infrastructure project. You don't get any more complex than building a tunnel underneath the centre of Melbourne.
A Metro Tunnel project is going to deliver essentially an end-to-end rail system for Melbourne's rail network. It's going to include underground stations and high-capacity trains. Essentially, we'll move about 500,000 extra people per week across the network.
The Digital Command Centre, or DCC, is an interactive digital data reporting system. It takes over 100 different data sources and combines and consolidates them in a single-touch interactive command room. The Command Centre takes state-of-the-art software and hardware and provides insightful business intelligence capability.
It's not just a product, but it's a process that incorporates culture, systems, reporting, and people. It automates the updates, the processes, and the reports, and provides the client with escalations based on their requirements. The scalability of the Digital Command Centre allows for seamless integration with future technologies such as geospatial, BIM, 4D and 5D, live site camera feeds, and machine learning.
We know the information is consistent, it's real, it's accurate, so therefore we go with a lot of confidence to know that the decisions that we do make are based on accurate information. So from that perspective, it gives us a great account of where we're at.
Communicating information accurately and consistently is crucial, and that's what the Digital Command Centre allows us to do.
Well, let's just take a pause for thought. I think Mace are a fabulous company. They're showing their vision on the future. And many companies are beginning to move in those directions. Around the world, there are some amazing companies doing some amazing things. So what are the messages there for us? Well, a new type of consultants emerging, seamless integration of data and information, new skills, you know, the data scientists. Digital communication turns become a reality. And machine learning is important, and 4D and 5D planning is happening. So we're seeing a new world, a new approach, a new way of working. And we've got to get to profitability. Many companies are struggling. Why? What's going on? Well, I use the concept of the profit pools, which comes from other industries. The bigger get a bigger, but we're all fishing in the same pond, the same profit pool. And what we've got to think about is, well, these companies aren't poor companies. They're very well-managed companies. They've run into trouble financially in terms of certain types of jobs. And if you look at the margins, you know, 1 to 3% margin, net margin, is a very low margin. But are we looking at the wrong metrics, maybe? So why do so many struggle? Well, if you look, I've looked at the top global companies, trying to understand where the profit pools are, how it operates, and what's going on. And what you see is a tremendous divergence, but overall profitability is low in the industry for the risk that is being taken, for the expertise that's being actually delivered on projects. So why? Well, if you look at any company, you've got projects, 10% of the jobs exceed expectations, 60% meet target, 15% have slippage, 9% break even, 5% make a loss, and then you get the black hole. And a black hole can drag the whole business down. And that's what we can't afford to have any longer. We've got to think about the way that why things are happening and the way they are. And a lot of it is illusions of certainty, poor time planning sometimes, incomplete design, and so on. We know the reasons. There's lots of research out there that tells us why. There's lots of models that tell us what we could do. But in fact, we haven't managed to change it. And on this question of profit pools, basically we're looking at how we look at a profit pool, how we fish in that profit pool. And there are many opportunities beneath the surface. And if you think of general contracting, contractor, 80%, 90% sometimes of the job is out to specialty contractors. That's changed. And the way that the profit pool works, we need to start understanding much more. And if you think about manufacturing in the computer industry, for example, what used to happen was manufacturers used to make the margin, and the components, peripheral people, the peripheral products, they basically didn't make the margin. And what's happened is changed actually now. We've got a situation where the chip developers make much more than the hardware manufacturers, and the software people make much more. So they've changed the basics and the format of the industry. And if you think of construction then about profit pools, what you've got is basically a percentage of the value chain and a margin within that value chain. And often the production side is the lowest margin, often. Now you could argue that the return on capital employed is very good in the construction sector, but the net margins are very low. We really don't look not seriously at this question of these profit pools. I think we need a fresh think. And indeed, if you look at the margins across consulting, contracting, and so on, you should argue that risk and reward should go hand in hand. The reality is that they don't often. And what you're seeing is the margin in building work is lower than the margin in infrastructure, the argument being because of the risk. But we need to unpick some of this understanding and try and make the industry more sustainable, smarter going forward. And if you look at one of the world's biggest companies, ACS, 179,000, look at the bottom line on net margin. Look at the revenue. Can you sustain that? Well, of course, the company has changed in various ways. And it has its own profit pools. If you look, with industrial services, look at the margin on infrastructure. Look at the margin on services. So companies are changing. Companies are thinking differently. And we've got to think about profit pools in a different way. And basically understanding how the dynamics of the profit pool actually works. And lastly, bridging the gaps. Well, the gap between risk and profitability, the gap between design and production, the gap between the best and the rest. And our traditional model was the big ate the small. We're now looking at different models with collaboration, much more about how you think differently about how that industry is going and how it's structured, how we collaborate, how we trust. And I'm not asking you to read all these companies on here. This is another piece of work that I've been doing, looking at the multinationals and the transnationals. There's a message. There's a gap emerging between the best and the rest. And when we look, and I'm trying to understand why this is what's happening, we see changes, we see convergence happening, acquisitions. We see massive changes, new people coming into the market. The big getting bigger, offering more services, wider services, and offering different things. So were they bad? No, they weren't. But what's happening is they recognize they've got to be smarter. And they recognize there's new competition. And basically, they're being driven in a particular way. Some have become just too big for their domestic market. And consolidation. So they're diversifying into aeronautical, automotive. Scale is a very important part of that as well. And they're embracing digital. They're embracing the integration of design and production. They're looking differently at profit and profitability. And basically, the big are getting bigger. They're doing mega projects. They're smarter and delivering a lot of interesting things. Climate change, scopes of services are changing, fire safety, sustainability, all kinds of things are now being offered. And who owns what? Well, ownership is a thing. Employee-owned businesses are doing very well. Corporate social responsibility is an important thing. Understanding the impact of scale and being responsive to local, regional issues. Companies like Arup are an employee-owned trust, very successful, a very particular business model. And let's just finish and look at the contractors. Well, just the same arguments are applying. The big are getting bigger, the companies are getting smarter, they're being more focused, they're trying to look and de-risk their business much more, the project pipeline. They recognize the importance of value. They're focusing on integration, more EPC, more design and construct. They're managing cash much better, and they're looking at new ways of working. They're trying to improve margins, change the bidding model, reducing overheads. And I'm on you now as members of CIB, where do you fit into this? Well, profitability has got to be something that's got to be looked at in much more detail. Looking at the trigger points of becoming smarter matters a great deal as well. And the future is going to be owned by those who imagine it, design it, and implement it. Where are we? Well, I think there's a trigger of enlightenment. There's a peak of inflated expectation. There's a trough of disillusionment. There's a slope of new enlightenment. And there's a plateau of performance. And I think probably we're about there. We've got this scope and we see the slope of new enlightenment, and we are moving forward in a different way. So no messages, but the start of a conversation. Complexity, constant change, convergence, embracing innovation. Many of those current systems aren't fit for purpose. How we bid needs changing. Realizing that smart enterprises are pulling away from the pack. They're seeking sustainable profitability and being different. And as researchers, much more attention needs to be given about how enterprises work, the profitability, and understanding business. And a smart environment is reliant upon design and construction companies being smarter. And no matter how smart you are, this is always going to happen. Here's the guy coming through, he's got his new sports car. You've got a robot, see the nice lady there. Just wants to do something else. And there you go. Someone's always going to come along and smash you. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time. I hope maybe it does start the conversation, and I wish you great success and enjoying the conference. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're muted, Bob.
Oh, thank you, Roger, for this incredible, amazing talk, putting very difficult questions and issues and raising these issues. It's going to trigger a lot of thinking and debates for some time, not just in this conference. Hopefully, it will be also an ongoing issue to be discussed and researched as well. I'm opening the floor for a question. If you do you want to say a few words, Roger, or shall we start taking the questions?
No, I apologize. I've had a terrible cough and cold, and I apologize for coughing a few times. My apologies.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, so we will start. First one, Mohammed, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Roger, for inspiring talk. I've raised my hand while he's still talking just to make sure I reserve the first place. Two questions which are really, I think, linked. It seems that whenever an authority intervenes, we manage to achieve a leap in our performance. You gave us the example of China in Thailand, and how they managed to give a very competitive price, reduce time. Same with the hospitals in China, but I think we should also mention the Nightingale hospitals in UK.
Sure.
Also, you know, it's so I think I would like to see some detailed analysis how they managed, you know, something that the industry is not known for, but they managed to deliver it very quickly. And I want to link it to the question of profitability, which is very interesting. Do you think we need to start thinking about the democratization of profitability? Because all those guys who are making a lot of money is because what's going to happen during production. And it's those at production who are actually realizing the slimmest of profitability. So it seems there's imbalance. I would like you to comment on that.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Very good question. There's one factor I'd like to raise on all this. No one asked the question, why? Why did they make so much money? Why did they lose so much money? And then the accountants will come in and do the analysis with the lawyers and say, this was wrong, that was wrong, and so on. But there's two factors at play. One, we're embarrassed by this word profitability. Without profitability, you and I, all of us, wouldn't be sitting here, you know, because it pays the taxes and all kinds of things. So there's a certain embarrassment, and it's kind of, we don't like to talk about it. The other thing is, we never actually really asked that deep question, where was the money really made? I've been very lucky in my career, sat on the boards of a number of companies, and you know, you look at the cost, you look at the earned value things and so on, and you're never 100% certain. People would say, oh, we made it in the ground, oh, we made it on this, oh, we made it on that. And because we've got this outdated way, you know, in CIB, you've got some fabulous people. Where, if you were in a company, would you appear on the balance sheet? You'd be in the staff. What's the value we put on that? And the answer is, well, we're still back in that old industrial revolution days of we don't value the right things. And I think profitability is also in that. So your point about the democratization of profitability, I remember that one.
I think it's a very good one. But let's not be embarrassed. Let's start actually investigating properly, because this matters. It's jobs. It's the future. And we just don't talk about it.
Amazing ideas. Thank you for the discussion. We've got Ghassan as well, please.
Hi, Professor.
Make it easy, Ghassan. Don't give me a difficult one.
Extremely easy, and I was gonna praise you first, and then say I very much enjoyed this. I would look at it as a roadmap for the future. In fact, it could be part of a national strategy of any nation across the globe. It was full of great ideas and futuristic thinking. I'm going to ask you about COVID now.
Okay.
And I keep hearing that the world has lost trillions of pounds sterling or dollars or whatever. Somebody has to pay for it, for sure. A construction has a share and they have to pay. I mean, what do you think? How construction firms would look like? You have shown us a picture about merger between companies and etc. I could imagine a lot of companies would suffer. The industry in general would suffer for at least for the next few years, because post-COVID, nobody knows how the future would look like. I mean, this is reality, Roger. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean, what could happen?
Thank you, Ghassan. A great question as always. Thank you. I'm going to put a different spin on it. I think actually, go back to Joseph Schumpeter. I love looking at some of the way some of these people think. Actually, I think COVID's a fantastic opportunity as well. It's a trigger point. It's making us change. You're quite right. It has cost a lot of money. But there's a lot of great companies doing some great things now, and they will adapt. And I don't think anyone's really looking at the positive. It's all down, 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 down. And I think there's some real positives as well that will come out of this. And looking at some of these consultants, and, you know, I don't want to overplay the hand, but when I go and look at what some of these companies do, they are amazing. They really are. And they'll get around it. And I think there's a positive that'll come out of it. We'll be more productive. I really believe that.
To look at it from a positive point of view, absolutely. Yeah. I agree with you, really. I agree with you. Maybe COVID is a change agent for us. It's the sense of urgency we needed for the last few years, and now maybe the chance to do something really innovative, different. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you for a lovely question. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, I would like to raise two different points. One is related to theory, and one is related to practice. They are not directly related to each other. The first one, related to theory, it says that the bigger the risk, the more profit margin you expect. And we have sectors which they take far less risks compared to the construction sector, and it's just non-comparable type of profit margin they have compared to the construction sector. So what is that we are, as a sector, we are breaking economic theories or diminishing them, or just I don't know. So this is one point. The second point, if we look at other third world countries, and sorry about the expression, this is the reality, or developing countries, if some people want to put it in a nice way, maybe. There are some countries where you look at the construction sector and the profit margin of the construction sector there, it's very high profit margin. And I know these in Africa and in Asia, some of them, they have reaching 20% profit margin. This is unbelievable, unheard of in the West. But yes, there are huge uncertainties and risks, especially price fluctuations and exchange rate fluctuations and inflation. Maybe that is a part of the situation there. But also, if you can put a bit of light on that as well. So these 2 points. Thank you.
The balance, well, there's linked. The relationship between risk and reward is the key. And if I'm going into Niger, which has some political challenges at the moment, I'm not going to go in there with a margin of 1 to 10%. I'm going to go in there with a margin of 25, 30% in the hope I can make 3, 4, 5%. And I think that's reality. And you're pricing a number of risks, and that is an important point. But the risk-reward ratio is completely out of balance. It is. In that, everyone says, why do these mega projects go over so much? How could we possibly get it so wrong? Well, why are we being pointed as the people to blame? It was the people that procured it that got it wrong, rather than the people who are going to build it most of the time, because they have these illusions of certainty. And I think we should take a lot more time on tendering. I think we should actually do a lot more work about bidding, how we bid, and the background of bidding. I haven't given you a very good answer, Tahir, because there isn't a magic answer to that one, but that risk-reward ratio is absolutely crucial.
Okay, thank you so much, Roger. Any more questions? We are a bit of 5 minutes over time. We wish to stay even longer with Roger.
Taha, could I have one? Could I have an office the size of Ghassan's?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. No, sorry. I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose that one.
We can't wait to see you, Roger.
Okay, so
and please, Dr. Taha, because I have to pass, I told our chief executive of the CIB, Caroline, that I'll be meeting Roger in Dubai. So she said, please pass him my best regards. It's virtual now, so I'm passing it online.
Yeah, virtually. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Great talks, amazing discussions. We all benefit from it and for some time to come as well. I just want to make a reminder that we're going to split after the break. We've taken, I think, now 6 minutes of the break. We are going to split after the break into track 6 and 5, and then come back to this room for the keynote, for the keynotes, and then break again for track 7 and 8, and then come back to this room for the final concluding session. Thank you all so much, and see you after the break.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.